Chapter 6 of An Experiment in Criticism by C.S. Lewis. The Meanings of Fantasy. The word fantasy is both a literary and a psychological term. As a literary term, a fantasy means any narrative that deals with impossibles and preternaturals. The Ancient Mariner, Gulliver, Erewhon, The Wind in the Willows, The Witch of Atlas, Jurgen, The Crock of Gold, the Vera Historia, Micromegas, Flatland, and Apellius's Metamorphosis are fantasies. Of course, they are very heterogeneous in spirit and purpose. The only thing common to them is the fantastic. I shall call this sort of fantasy literary fantasy. As a psychological term, fantasy has three meanings. 1. An imaginative construction which in some way or other pleases the patient and is mistaken by him for reality. A woman in this condition imagines that some famous person is in love with her. A man believes that he is the long-lost son of noble and wealthy parents, and that he will soon be discovered, acknowledged, and overwhelmed with luxuries and honors. The commonest events are twisted, often not without ingenuity, into evidence for the treasured belief. To this kind of fantasy I need give no name, because we need not mention it again. Delusion, except by some accident, is of no literary interest. 2. A pleasing imaginative construction, entertained incessantly and to his injury by the patient, but without the delusion that it is a reality. A waking dream, known to be such by the dreamer, of military or erotic triumphs, of power or grandeur, even of mere popularity, is either monotonously reiterated or elaborated year by year. It becomes the prime consolation and almost the only pleasure of the dreamer's life. Into this invisible riot of the mind, this secret prodigality of being, he retires whenever the necessities of life set him free. Realities, even such realities as please other men, grow insipid to him. He becomes incapable of all the efforts needed to achieve a happiness not merely notional. The dreamer about limitless wealth will not save sixpence. The imaginary Don Juan will take no pains to make himself ordinarily agreeable to any woman he meets. I call this activity morbid castle building. 3. The same activity indulged in moderately and briefly as a temporary holiday or recreation, duly subordinated to more effective and outgoing activities. Whether a man would be wiser to live with none of this at all in his life, we need not perhaps discuss, for no one does. Nor does such reverie always end in itself. What we actually do is often what we dreamed of doing. The books we write were once books which, in a daydream, we pictured ourselves writing, though of course never quite so perfect. I call this normal castle building. But normal castle building itself can be of two kinds, and the difference between them is all important. They may be called the egotistic and the disinterested. In the first kind, the daydreamer himself is always the hero, and everything is seen through his eyes. It is he who makes the witty retorts, captivates the beautiful women, owns the ocean-going yacht, or is acclaimed as the greatest living poet. In the other kind, the daydreamer is not the hero of the daydream, or perhaps not present in it at all. Thus, a man who has no chance of going to Switzerland in reality may entertain himself with reveries about an Alpine holiday. He will be present in the fiction, but not as hero, rather as spectator. As his attention would be fixed not on himself, but on the mountains, if he were really in Switzerland, so in the castle building his attention is fixed on the imagined mountains. But sometimes the dreamer is not present in the daydream at all. I am probably one of many who, on a wakeful night, entertain themselves with invented landscapes. I trace great rivers from where the gulls scream at the estuary, through the windings of ever narrower and more precipitous gorges. up to the barely audible tinkling of their source in a fold of the moors. But I am not here myself as explorer or even as tourist. I am looking at that world from outside. A further stage is often reached by children, usually in cooperation. They may feign a whole world and people it and remain outside it. But when that stage is reached, something more than mere reverie has come into action. Construction, invention, in a word, fiction, is proceeding. There is thus, if the daydreamer has any talent, an easy transition from disinterested castle building to literary invention. There is even a transition from egoistic to disinterested, and thence to genuine fiction. Trollope tells us in his autobiography how his own novels thus grew out of castle building, which had originally been of the most flagrantly egoistic and compensatory type. In the present inquiry, however, we are concerned not with the relation between castle building and composition, but with that between castle building and reading. I have already said that one kind of story dear to the unliterary is that which enables them to enjoy love or wealth or distinction vicariously through the characters. It is, in fact, guided or conducted egoistic castle building. While they read, they project themselves into the most enviable or most admirable character, and probably after they have finished reading, his delights and victories supply hints for further daydreams. It is sometimes, I think, assumed that all the reading of the unliterary is of this sort and involves this projection. By this projection, I mean a projection for the sake of vicarious pleasures, triumphs, and distinctions. Some sort of projection into all the major characters, villains as well as heroes, enviable and pitiable alike, is no doubt necessary for all readers of all stories. We must empathize, must enter into their feelings, or we might as well read about the loves of the triangles. But it would be rash to assume that even for unliterary readers of popular fiction, there is always a projection of the egoistic castle builder's type. For one thing, some of them like comic stories. I do not think that the enjoyment of a joke is ever, for them or anyone else, a form of castle building. We certainly do not wish to be the cross-gartered Malvolio or Mr. Pickwick in the pond. We might conceivably say, I wish I'd been there to see. But this is only to wish ourselves as spectators, which we already are, in what we suppose to be a better seat. Again, many of the unliterary like stories of ghosts and other horrors, but the better they like them, the less they would wish to be characters in one themselves. It is possible that stories of adventures are sometimes enjoyed because the reader sees himself in the role of the courageous and resourceful hero. But I do not think that we can be sure that this is always the only or even the main pleasure. He may admire such a hero and desire his success without making that success his own. There remains a residue of stories whose attraction, as far as we can see, can depend on nothing but egoistic castle building, success stories, certain love stories, and certain stories of high life. These are the favorite reading of readers in the lowest class. Lowest because reading takes them out of themselves, confirms them in an indulgence which they already use too much, and turns them away of most of what is most worth having, both in books and life. This castle building, whether done with the aid of books or unaided, is what the psychologists call fantasy, in one of its senses. If we had not made the necessary distinctions, it would, therefore, be easy to assume that such readers would like literary fantasies. The reverse is true. Make experiments, and you will find that they detest them, think them only fit for kids, see no point in reading about things that could never really happen. To us, it is apparent that the books they like are full of impossibilities. They have no objection to monstrous psychology and preposterous coincidence. but they demand rigorously an observance of such natural laws as they know and a general ordinariness, the clothes, gadgets, food, houses, occupations, and tone of the everyday world. This is, no doubt, partly due to the extreme inertia of their imaginations. They can render real to themselves only what they have read of 1,000 times and seen 100 times before. But there is a deeper reason. Though they do not mistake their castle building for reality, they want to feel that it might be. The woman reader does not believe that all eyes follow her as they follow the heroine of the book, but she wants to feel that, given more money, and therefore better dresses, jewels, cosmetics, and opportunities, they might. The man does not believe he is rich and socially successful, but if only he won a sweepstake, if only fortunes could be made without talent, he might become so. He knows the daydream is unrealized. He demands that it should be, in principle, realizable. That is why the slightest hint of the admittedly impossible ruins his pleasure. A story which introduces the marvelous, the fantastic, says to him by implication, I am merely a work of art. You must take me as such, must enjoy me for my suggestions, my beauty, my irony, my construction, and so forth. There is no question of anything like this happening to you in the real world. After that, reading, his sort of reading, becomes pointless. Unless he can feel, this might, who knows, this might one day happen to me, the whole purpose for which he reads is frustrated. It is, therefore, an absolute rule. The more completely a man's reading is a form of egoistic castle building, the more he will demand a certain superficial realism, and the less he will like the fantastic. He wishes to be deceived, at least momentarily, and nothing can deceive unless it bears a plausible resemblance to reality. Disinterested castle building may dream of nectar and ambrosia, of fairy bread and honey-dew. The egoistic sort dreams rather of bacon and eggs, or steak. But I have already used the word realism, which is equivocal, and must be taken to pieces.